Yadi Sat Sangh Ji, we're all very blessed today to be gathered in the Pavan Pavitra Hazuri of Satguru, Shri Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj, the King of Kings, the Saint of Saints, the Saviour of this world and the next. And as I stand before you, the beloved Sat Sangat, and as I stand before my beloved Satguru Ji, I'd like to ask you for forgiveness for any mistakes I made in the past and for any mistakes I'll make in the future. I also want to place a beinti at your Charan Kamal, and I ask you to continue to shower me with your blessings and to continue to keep me in your ardas, so that when I speak only within the realms of Gurmat, and so that when I walk with and towards these Gurmat principles. There are many different gardens that have been constructed across the world throughout the ages. Perhaps the most famous garden known is one that was conceived in antiquity, one that was born over 2,700 years ago, one that was made by an Assyrian king. And this garden is unique because it wasn't built in an area that's known for lush greenery. It wasn't built in an area that's known for the abundance of water. No, Khalsa Ji, this garden was built in a desert. This garden was built in an area known for sand dunes, was known for its paucity of water. And when it was constructed, it was known as the wonder of the people. And there are two reasons for this. One, because of the area it was built in, but two, because it wasn't built on a flat surface, it was built in terraces. Archaeologists today say that garden was over 80 feet high and 100 feet across. New technology had to be invented to funnel water from the bottom right to the very top of these terraces. There are over 50-mile canals that used to funnel water towards the canals, towards the garden. And this garden was known as the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, and they were currently based in what is present-day Iraq. But I don't intend to speak to you today about any worldly garden. Today I intend to speak to you about a spiritual garden, about a metaphorical garden. And where is this garden? This garden is one that we all live on, one that we breathe on, one that we walk on. It's the very earth. The seedlings, the flowers, the plants, the trees are each and every single human being. Despite our age, despite whereabout in the spectrum we are, whether we're seedlings or whether we're majestic trees, we've all come here with a single purpose. We were all planted here by Satguru Shri Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj for a single purpose. Gobind milan ki ek teri bariya, avar kaaj tera kite nakam, mil saad sangat baj keval naam. This is your chance to meet Akaal Purkh. This is your chance to meet Satguru Shri Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj. And there's nothing else that you can do. There's no other works that will fulfill this task other than meeting, sitting in the Sad Sangat and meditating on the name of God. Khalsa Ji, despite this very purpose that we were born onto this earth, despite this very purpose we were planted onto this earth, there are many of us who strayed away. But this is all within hukam. This is all within the hukam of Satguru Shri Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj. Hukmi uttam neech, hukam lik duk sak paye, ikna hukmi baksis, ik hukmi sada paye. Some are placed high, some are placed low. According to the will of Akaal Purkh is written that some will endure pleasure, some will endure pain, depending on their good and bad deeds. Some are blessed, some have been bestowed the kirpa of Akaal Purkh and are saved, whereas others, sada, throughout the ages, will continue to remain in the cycle of life and death. Despite this, Khalsa Ji, Akaal Purkh loves each and every single one of his flowers that he's planted in this earth. So much so that he provides them not only water, not only sunlight, but he ensures the environment is right for them to grow, for them to develop, for them to prosper. And yet people today deny the existence of the gardener that is Akaal Purkh. They say, no, it's due to our own acts we're able to feed ourselves. Now Akaal Purkh, in the infinite mercy, sometimes does something very unique. Something that no other gardener in this world does. And what is that, Khalsa Ji? Satguru Shri Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj sometimes plants a special flower in this very earth. A flower that's designed for a greater purpose, that's designed not only to save themselves, but to bloom in such a way that that acts as inspiration for every single flower around it. But not only that, Khalsa Ji, to act as inspiration for the descendants of those flowers. Till today, we remember that very flower, which was planted in 1761. And for us to begin to understand the Jeevani of this flower, we need to go back in time. A few years before 1761, there were two Gursikhs, Akali Baba Ishir Singh Ji and Mata Raj Kaur. They were Gursikhs in the Jatha, the Shahida Missile, which was headed by Baba Deep Singh Ji at the time. And they had received some good news. Mata Raj Kaur was expecting her first child. And as Gursikhs, they decided to go and see Brahmgyani Baba Deep Singh Ji to receive their blessings and to ask them to do an ardas for them. And when they came to the Sangat of Baba Deep Singh Ji, they asked Babaji, we want you to do an ardas for our child. What ardas do they have? What do they want their child to be? The ardas was that Babaji do an ardas to Satguru Shri Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj, that our son becomes a Mahapurush, that our son becomes a Brahmgyani. Why? Such that he will be able to meditate on the name of God and not only save himself, but save us as well. This was the ardas of those Gursikh parents. Baba Deep Singh Ji said, you're destined not to have only one child, you're going to have two children. If this is your ardas for your first child, what's your ardas for your second child? Mata Raj Kaur, with tears in her eyes, began to look at Baba Deep Singh Ji and said, make the second child a fearless saint soldier. Make him sacrifice his wealth, his body, his mind, everything to the Khalsa Panth. Make it such that he becomes a shaheed in the battlefield. And when he becomes a shaheed, let his body be cut to pieces. Let him have hundreds of bullet holes in him. And let it be that when he falls onto the battlefield's floor and he's given all his blood to the Khalsa Panth, let Satguru Shri Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj in their mercy come onto this earth and pick this child up. This is the ardas that was done by Baba Deep Singh Ji. In the Sangat, the Ladli Fauja, the Nihang Singhs who were present over there had tears in their eyes listening to this ardas of this Khalsa mother. She didn't desire for her son to have a worldly position. She didn't desire for him to be made healthy. No, Khalsa Ji, the only ardas she had was that he be born to die for the Khalsa Panth, in service of the nation. In this way, the first son was born. He was known as Baba Sant Singh. He became a huge Mahapurush, a Brahmgyani. But in 1761, another son was born, as per the bachans of Baba Deep Singh Ji and the ardasa that was done before Satguru Shri Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj. In that bachan, Baba Deep Singh Ji said, Satguru Shri Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj has heard your ardas. He is going to send a flower into your house and take care of this flower, because this flower, not only will their name be immortal, but their legend will be immortal, such that throughout the generations, the Khalsa will remember him again and again and again. And as per the bachans of Baba Deep Singh Ji, this second child was known as Phoola, was called Flower. In 1762, the Vadda Kalugara happened, where thousands upon thousands of men, women and children were massacred by Ahmad Shah Abdali for one specific purpose: to destroy the Khalsa Panth, to destroy this nation of Satguru Shri Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj. And in that struggle, Akali Baba Ishir Singh Ji, the father of Baba Phoola Singh Ji, became a shaheed. Akali Baba Phoola Singh was only a couple of months at this time. And Khalsa Ji, his mother, who was a single parent, had to raise him. She had to raise him. She is the one who taught Baba Phoola Singh Ji how to tie his damalla. She is the one who put the Panchkakar on him. She is the one who began to form the link between Satguru Shri Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj and Baba Phoola Singh Ji. She began to teach him about Nam Abhyas, about Mool Mantar Sahib, about Gur Mantar Sahib. She began to teach him about the Baniya and Shri Dasam Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj and Shri Sadguru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj. And in this way, Khalsa Ji, at the age of 7, when Baba Phoola Singh Ji was ready to learn Shastra Vidya, when he was ready to learn Jang Vidya, when he was ready to learn the lifestyle of the saint soldier, because his foundation in the way of the saint had already been built by his mother, she then decided to take him to Akaal Bunga, where the Shaheeda missile was staying. And she found a Gursikh that she used to remember from the days they would do Sangat in the Shaheeda missile. And that Gursikh was Akali Baba Naina Singh Ji. She came with 7-year-old Baba Phoola Singh Ji, and she gave Baba Phoola Singh Ji to Akali Baba Naina Singh Ji, and she placed a benti at the feet of Baba Naina Singh Ji to raise her son in the ways of the saint soldier, to raise him to become an Akali Nihang Singh, to raise him, to prepare him to become a Shaheed for the Panth, to live and die for the Panth. Khalsa Ji, a lot of the time in today's world we get asked a question: why do we have to be a saint and a soldier? In today's age, why can't we simply be a saint? Why do we have to be a soldier? Why do we have to carry a kirpan with us? Why do we have to know Shastra Vidya? Why do we need to study the arts of the battlefield? We get asked this question today. There are armies here, there are governments here, there are police here. We don't need any saint soldiers. And to answer that question, I wish to use a metaphor. I wish to use an example. And that's the example of the sun and the moon. Throughout the ages, over hundreds and thousands of years, the moon was worshipped. The moon was seen as pure. The moon was seen as unblemished. The moon was seen as calm. It's the embodiment of calm. It gives us very little light. It gives us very little heat. It's very easy on the eyes. And for thousands of years, there were religions that were dedicated to the moon. Not only in India, but in Africa as well, in South America. And people would place all their faith, all their hopes, all their devotion in the moon. On full moons, they would sacrifice animals to appease the moon. Despite this, Khalsa Ji, something very unique happened in the 60s. The ancestors of those who'd prayed to the moon, the ancestors of those who'd placed all their faith, all their devotion, all their love in the moon, decided to build a spaceship, and they left Earth's orbit and they landed on the moon. And this pavitra surface of the moon that had never been touched, that had never been seen, that had never been desecrated, was defiled by the feet of these very people. And not only that, Khalsa Ji, not only did they walk on the moon, but they then decided to get a flag. And they planted the flag on the moon's surface. And we need to ask ourselves, what does that mean? What does it mean when you take a flag and you plant it on a surface, on a piece of land? It means the moon is no longer sovereign. The moon is no longer free. The moon is no longer independent. It belongs to a certain people now. Now, what is this example of the moon that I'm telling you? How does this link to the saint soldier? The moon represents the saints of God. In Satyug, empresses, kings, queens, people used to bow before the men of God. Those men and women that meditate on the name of God day and night would be worshipped. And Khalsa Ji, as time progressed, as we moved through the ages in Kaljug, the very kings, the very people who used to worship the moon, who used to worship the saints, then decided to persecute them, then decided to torture them, then decided to say, you're not free, you're not sovereign, you're not independent anymore. No, you live under our feet, we own you. This example is repeated time and time again. We can talk about Bhagat Kabir Ji, we can talk about Bhagat Namdev Ji, we can talk about Satguru Shri Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj. We can talk about the Hindu Pandits who came to Satguru Shri Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji Maharaj. Countless examples of kings, of emperors, persecuting the men and women of God. And Khalsa Ji, if we look at the other aspect, the sun. What is the sun? The sun is raging. The sun is burning. The sun is always ready to go to war. The sun is always armed, ready to destroy anything that comes in his path. And Khalsa Ji, the sun represents the soldier, the one who's ready to go into the battlefield whenever he's needed there. And the question comes to the very people who went and took their spaceship to the moon, why don't you take that spaceship to the sun? Why don't you go and try and land on the sun? Why don't you try and walk on the sun? And they look at you and they say, are you mad? We can't even look at the sun, let alone trod on it, let alone land on it. Khalsa Ji, this is why we have to be a saint and a soldier. But then the question comes, how can we be a saint and a soldier? How can we be the moon and the sun? And the answer lies within Bhai Gurdas Ji's verse. There was an interview that I read a couple of years ago by a Shaheed by the name of Bhai Sukhvinder Singh Ji, who was a 26-year-old Shaheed who took part in the liberation movement of the 1980s and 1990s. He became the deputy chief of the Khalistan Commando Force. And in one of his interviews that he gave to a person by the name of Joyce Pettigrew, she asked him about the nature of a Sikh. How is a Sikh meant to act? How are they meant to live? How can they justify being a saint and a soldier? And he said, the life of a Sikh is like water. Is like water in a stream. And if you look at water, Khalsa Ji, you'll find water never flows upwards. It comes from the very mountains, very hills, and it flows downwards. It keeps going down again and again and again till it's under the very earth and it lets people walk over it. Not only that, Khalsa Ji, that water is cooling. That water allows you to quench your thirst. That water allows you to wash your clothes. That water allows you to cook your food. That water allows you to clean yourself. Khalsa Ji, today that water is used to create electricity. The water is used for every single use. In the same way, a Sikh is meant to be used in that way. A Sikh is here to do seva, not only for this Qawm, but for each and every person living in this earth. And not for each and every person, for each and every living being. But Khalsa Ji, something strange happens to water. If you block it, if you create an obstacle in front of it, then the water becomes stagnant and the water begins to overflow. But then if you do something else, if you begin to get the water and you put it in a pot and you begin to heat the pot, what happens to the water? The water doesn't stay calm anymore. The water doesn't stay cool anymore. But Khalsa Ji, an important fact to note is water doesn't turn like this. It doesn't turn boiling all of a sudden. It endures. It allows heat to be placed on it until it reaches a breaking point, until it can take no more, until it decides now is the time to stand up, now is the time to react, and then water turns into steam. And Khalsa Ji, steam only goes one way. Steam only rises and rises and rises. In the same way, this is the life of the soldier. In the past, we've been subjected, we've been tortured, injustice has been placed on us. In the same way, in this present age, that's happening to us. The saint-soldier concept is one that was introduced by Satguru Shri Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj and is one that will continue to the end of time itself. It will always be needed. Moving back to Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji, there are a few Britishers who actually witnessed Akali Phoola Singh and recorded his Jivan. Now they were sworn enemies of Akali Baba Phoola Singh and the Nihang Singhs, because they were trying to take over Punjab. They were trying to subjugate Punjab. And Akali Baba Phoola Singh believed in the freedom of each and every single human being. And despite this, Khalsa Ji, despite having hatred for him, despite having negative thoughts for him, if you look through the literature, throughout history, you'll find there's always praise. The enemy always praises the conduct of the Sikh, whether it's by Rajinder Singh Jinda and by Sukhdev Singh Sukha, or whether it's by Baba Akali Phoola Singh Ji. George Smith, who was a major in the British Army, commented that Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji is like Robin Hood of this country, in that any poor person he sees, he wants to share his wealth with them, he wants to share his food with them, he wants to sit down and do vichar with them, he wants to sit down and do sadh sangat with them, he wants to link them into the feet of Satguru Shri Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj, to Satguru Shri Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj. Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji may be known as a soldier, but this is not, Khalsa Ji, this is not the path that he wanted to tread on. He was a sant first. His main mission in life was to unite others with Guru Sahib, was to create that link. Before we move further into understanding the Jeevani of Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji, which is like an ocean, it's impossible to talk about it in an hour. It's impossible to talk about it in a couple of hours. Khalsa Ji, we're only going to talk about a few examples that illustrate the Jeevani of Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji, what a Mahan Jeevani was, and what the Jeevani of someone who calls themselves the Jathedar of Shri Akaal Takht Sahib should be like. But to understand this, we need to look back and understand the backdrop into where all this was playing out. Because in 1748, the Sikh masses, the Sikh armies, organized them into the Dal Khalsa, and they divided themselves into 12 different missiles. And these forces drove out the Mughals. They repelled 9 Afghan invasions. And Khalsa Ji, 3 years after the massacre of men, women and children, they captured Lahore, the capital of Punjab. Despite this, the missiles began to fight against one another. They began to argue against one another. They became attached to Maya and properties that were previously of the Mughal state. In this way, the very unity, the very fabric of the Khalsa nation was challenged, was compromised. And it was in this way, in the late 1790s, where the British first turned their attention to the lands of Punjab, where they first realized there was infighting, there was an opportunity for them to bring their armed forces and to take over that land. Khalsa Ji, Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji, who wasn't the Jathedar of the Shahidan missile yet, he was still a Sevadar over there. He was camping on the banks of the Satluj River, along with 100 other Nihang Singhs. And word had got to them that the British have dispatched an army, have dispatched a regiment who were due to cross the river and to conquer certain areas of Punjab. They were already making maps of various areas of Punjab that they wanted to annex into their own kingdom. In this way, Khalsa Ji, Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji didn't decide, I'm going to go and speak to my Jathedar, I'm going to go and speak to Baba Naina Singh Ji and get their permission to go to war. He didn't decide, I'm going to leave it to other missiles to make a stand. Because we have this choice in front of us as well. We face many different challenges as a Panth. And individually we can make a difference, but we need to realize that the Panth is ours. We have a responsibility to it on an individual level. We can't look to other people. We can't look to Jathedars and say they'll do it. We can't look to so-called Jathebandis and say they'll do it. No, each and every one of us needs to take a step, because this is our Panth. We're all members of this. We're in it together. In this way, Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji and the rest of the 100 Nihang Singhs did an ardas before Satguru Shri Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj, that either grant us the glow of victory, or let us, or find a place at your Charan Kamal for us. In this way, Khalsa Ji, the Nagaras began to beat, the war trumpets began to sound, and they surrounded the area the British were due to invade. The British were headed by someone called Captain Wright, And this is a battle that they've hidden, that's not recorded in any British textbooks. It's recorded though in Panth Prakash by Ratan Singh Ji. And he records how the British came through the bridge and they weren't expecting any resistance, they weren't expecting any oppositions. And as they came through, the lions of Satguru Shri Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj pounced on them. And within a couple of hours, the whole regiment, other than a commanding officer and a lieutenant, were put to the sword. Khalsa Ji, Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji's legend began to spread across Punjab. This Gursikh who single-handedly had destroyed a whole regiment. And the British took note of this. They began to realize the thorn in the side that the Akali Nihang Singhs are going to be. They realized we can't take over Punjab by brute force. They're too strong. We're going to have to use other methods. And in this way, they waited and waited and waited. Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji in the 1800s was selected, was not elected, but was selected by the Khalsa Panth to be the Jathedar of Shri Akaal Takht Sahib. There was no SGPC, there was no committees then. There was just the Guru Khalsa Panth. There was just 5 Singhs who selected Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji to be the Jathedar of the Akaal Takht. Why Khalsa Ji? Because Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji had the principles, had the mentality, had the had everything that made him a true son of Satguru Shri Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji Maharaj, who placed the Khalsa Panth above everything else. In December 1802, as Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji was consolidating his power in Punjab, was uniting each one of the missiles, he decided to attack Amritsar, which was in the control of the Pangani missile. And he decided to bring his cannons and his armies to the outskirts of Amritsar. And when Bibi Sulakhan Kaur, who was the Signi of Sardar Gulab Singh, who was the previous Jathedar of this missile, she decided that we need to fight. And she deployed her cannons on the towers surrounding Amritsar, ready to fight the army of Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji. Despite knowing that Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji had a stronger army, had more power, had a greater sense of resources, she readied her soldiers for war. And when Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji found out about this, he didn't choose sides, Khalsa Ji. He didn't say Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji is right. He didn't say Bibi Sulakhan Kaur Ji is right. No, Khalsa Ji. As the two armies were ready to go to war, Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji with the Akali Nihang battle standards went right into the middle of the two armies. And with folded hands, he requested them to have an audience with him. Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji and Bibi Sulakhan Kaur Ji met Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji. And Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji told them, it's a huge sin for you to even consider firing cannons within the precedence of Shri Amritsar Sahib. But it's a greater sin for a Sikh to kill another Sikh. And in this way, Khalsa Ji, Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji was able to negotiate a peace settlement between these two missiles, such that Amritsar became annexed into the kingdom of Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji, but Bibi Sulakhan Kaur Ji was given vast lands in the kingdom of Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji. This is the character of the Jathedar of Sachkhand Shri Akaal Takht Sahib, who's not ready to take sides, who does what's best for the Panth. Moving forward, the British in 1809 decided that they were going to try and have a dialogue with Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji, because they recognized the Lahore kingdom, the Khalsa Raj was spreading and was going to take over the whole of India, so they wanted to try and create a barrier. And they sent someone by the name of Charles Metcalfe, who can be seen in that picture on the left hand side. And they sent him to Amritsar, which was the center of Khalsa Raj, for the political and the spiritual capital. And he came with a group of over 200 Shia Muslim soldiers. A meeting was held between him and Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji. And during that time, it was the Shia Muslim festival where they commemorate the martyrdom of Hussein, who is a grandson of Muhammad. And the way they commemorate is that they go in a procession, torturing themselves, beating themselves. And they decided to take this procession into the streets of Amritsar. At that time, at Sachkhand Shri Darbar Sahib, Kirtan was going on. Gurbani Kirtan was going on. And as the Shia Muslims came closer to Sachkhand Shri Akaal Takht Sahib, as they came closer to the precedence of Shri Darbar Sahib, they decided to make louder noises, and they began to shout, Ya Ali and Ya Hussein, louder and louder and louder. They wanted to challenge the authority of the Sikh nation. They wanted to challenge the Gurbani that was emitting from the home of Satguru Shri Guru Ramdas Ji Maharaj. Kaljug me Kirtan Pardana. It's the highest form of worship, the most exalted form of worship. And this way, when Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji heard the sounds that they were making, he decided to send 2 or 3 Gursikhs to go and peacefully ask them to move on quietly. The Gursikhs went over there, and the Shia Muslims didn't have any peaceful intentions. They went there full of aggression, and they decided to start a fight with these 3 Akali Nihang Singhs that had been sent. As soon as Baba Phoola Singh Ji realized this, he set off with his tega unsheathed in his hand. He arrived at the spot that's situated right behind Shri Akaal Takht Sahib, right behind the road behind Shri Akaal Takht Sahib. And when he got there, he saw 200 Shia Muslims attacking these 3 Gursikhs that he'd sent. And the attack was so ferocious that one of the Nihang Singhs, Dumalla, was on the floor. Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji, seeing this, immediately lunged forward with his tega. And over 25 of the Shia Muslims were lying at his feet, covered in blood. Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji only stopped cutting his way through when they began to beg for forgiveness. But it's very important to note that Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji wasn't the first person to take out his sword. That was not his first reaction. No, Khalsa Ji. His first reaction was to go there peacefully, was to respect their religion, to respect their right to do what they do as per their religious traditions. But as soon as they tried to insult the Sikh Panth, as soon as they tried to insult Sachkhand Shri Darbar Sahib, as soon as they tried to insult Shri Guru Ramdas Ji Maharaj and Sachkhand Shri Darbar Sahib, Akali Baba Phoola Singh, right from the very front, led and taught them a lesson such that that procession has never been taken down in the precedence of Amritsar right till the present day. There's another example of Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji's leadership that I want to talk about. And it's a bit of a negative example, but it shows how the Akaal Takht, the Jathedar, acts. Whoever they're dealing with it, whether it's a worldly power or whether it's a so-called spiritual power. Maharaja Ranjit Singh in his 20s decided to get married to a Muslim despite already being married. And he got married to her according to Muslim traditions. So she didn't become a Sikh, she remained a Muslim. And Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji decided to mint a coin in her name and decided to build mosques in her name. Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji, as soon as he heard this, as the Jathedar of Shri Akaal Takht Sahib, decided to summon Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji. And he was disappointed because Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji was meant to be the emperor, was meant to be the king of Lahore Darbar, was meant to be the king of Khalsa Raj. And when Maharaja Ranjit Singh arrived at Sachkhand Shri Akaal Takht Sahib, Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji listened to him first and then gave him Tankhah, decided that no, you have breached the rules of being a Sikh. And in this way, Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji ordered Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji to be lashed 25 times. And some people say that no, Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji didn't do this. But according to our historical documents, they say that Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji was tied to a tree and Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji themselves lashed him 25 times. Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji with tears in their eyes, they used to look up to Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji as their father. Promised never to transgress again in this way. But the important thing to realize is Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji didn't bow down to anyone. Whether it was the Britishers or whether it was Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji, there was no worldly power that could influence Akaal Thakht and his decisions, which were according to Gurmat Siddhant. Because remember, in the previous example, when Lord Metcalfe had come and Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji were having that discussion, an attack on Lord Metcalfe's soldiers, so-called British soldiers, would be attack on the British government itself. But Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji didn't think in that way. He didn't think, oh, I should be political and I should step back and not do anything. No, Akali Baba Phoola Singh, right from the very front, was ready to stand up for the principles of Sikhi, was ready to stand up to the Gurmat principles, was not going to let any disrespect be shown to the house of Satguru Shri Guru Ram Das Ji Maharaj. Now during the 1800s, Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji decided to modernize the Khalsa army. And when he modernized the Khalsa army, he decided to increase the wage demands of various generals, of various soldiers. And the strength of the Khalsa army began to increase tenfold. During these years, it was the time of the Napoleon Wars, which had just concluded in Europe. So there were many different generals and officers looking for employment. In this way, Khalsa Raj, Lahore Darbar employed over 200 foreigners in their army to act as advisors. People came from Greece, Russia, Turkey, Italy, Spain, France. But in modernizing the Khalsa army, which was very, very important, because Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji was able to transform the Khalsa army into the strongest nation in the whole of Asia, certain things were lost. For example, these two generals, General Allard and General Ventura, when they came, they brought drill instructions from France. And in this way, the official language of the Khalsa army was meant to be French. In addition to this, the bana that the Singhs used to wear was got rid of. And instead they began to wear trousers, they began to wear coats, they began to mimic a Western army. And people who used to pass through Punjab used to note that the Khalsa army was very strong. But they used to note something else. They used to note there was a specific regiment within the army of Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji that was sacred, that still held true to the beliefs, to the traditions, to the instructions of Satguru Shri Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj, keeping the boli and the bana that Maharaj had instructed them to keep. Baron Charles Hugel states that they were constantly armed to the teeth, insulting everyone they met, particularly Europeans, and it wasn't uncommon to see them riding about with a drawn sword in each hand, 2 more in their belt, a matchlock on their back, and 3 or 4 chakkars fastened around their dumallas. He also noted that they fight with desperation and are always employed in the most dangerous services. Now, Khalsa Ji, it's important to note that the Akali Nihang Singhs, who were part of the Khalsa army, did not used to take any payment. Any maya that was given to them was spent on Sikhi Prachar, was sent on building Gurdwara Sahib, was sent on the langar of Gurdwara Sahib. Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji and the other Mukhi Singhs of the Shaheeda Missile never took any money, never put any money in their pockets. And yet, they were the ones that were sent to do the most daring activities. And there's one example I want to talk to you about. And it involves focusing your minds to this cannon that was built in India in 1775. It's the biggest cannon that was ever constructed within South Asia. It's known as two names, the Zamzama gun or the Pangani Wali top, because the Pangani missile were able to capture it. And what's special about it is Ahmad Shah Abdali had built it, but the way he built it is the metal materials were captured from the households of Sikhs and Hindus. They were melted down and created this gun that was then used to target their own people, that was used to subjugate the Hindus, the Sikhs, the other ethnic minorities in India. And this gun was capable of firing an 80-pound cannonball. There was no other gun in southern Asia which could match it. Now, throughout the ages, every single invader that's come through India has come through the Khyber Pass. And through the Khyber Pass, they come down to a city known as Multan, and then through Punjab, and then through the rest of India. And this hasn't only happened with the Mughals. No, Khalsa Ji. Over the last 2,000 years, it's happened again and again and again. Whether that's Darius I, the Persian king, Alexander the Great, Babur, or Ahmad Shah Abdali. They've all come through that path. And the last time we spoke about Sardar Hari Singh Nalwa closing the gates at Khyber Pass in 1837, but in reality, the first moves to stop this downward invasion and to arrest the calls was made by Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji in 1818. Multan was a very, very big city. It was an independent state, and it had allegiance to Afghanistan. It had allegiance to the Afghan king. And it was the last area in Punjab that was not under the control of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, that was not under the control of the Khalsa Raj. And over 4 or 5 times, the Khalsa army had tried to attack it again and again and again. But every time, the king of Multan, Muzaffar Khan, used to go into the Multan fort that couldn't be penetrated. And he used to offer tributes to Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji every year, but it was never captured. In this way, Khalsa Ji, when the Khalsa armies decided we're not going to let anyone invade our kingdom again, our lands again, it wasn't only for Punjab, it was for the rest of India. They decided this is the time to attack Multan, to annex Multan, to make Multan a part of Punjab. In this way, the Sikh army in January 1818 was dispatched. And Khalsa Ji, they managed to capture the outside of the city. They captured the forts of Khangarh and Muzaffargarh. Eventually, they captured the very city itself. But Muzaffar Khan had retreated into the fort along with 20,000 jihadi soldiers. Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji had brought an army of 25,000 soldiers as well. But he hadn't told Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji about this. He hadn't told the Shahida missile. So they weren't involved in this conflict initially. And for over 4 months, a siege was made of the Multan fort. And yet, they couldn't penetrate it. They couldn't break in. The horses of the Sikh army began to die. Soldiers began to die of starvation, waiting outside. Remember, at this time, it was May and June, the summer months in India. It was under this premise that Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji decided then to call Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji and the Shahida missile. Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji, who was situated in Anandpur Sahib at the time, did an ardas before Maharaj. The Maharaj blesses with Fateh, such that the Akali flag is raised on the fort of Multan. It took a month for Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji and the rest of the Jatha to arrive at Multan. And as soon as they did, they came with the Zamzama cannon. They came with the Pangani Wali top. And when they came with it, they began to fire again and again and again, trying to breach the wall. But while they were trying to do this, something very unique happened, Khalsa Ji. The axle of the gun broke. And in this way, they couldn't use the gun to fire. But they knew that was the only gun that was going to be able to penetrate the fort. So, Khalsa Ji, the volunteers, those who weren't getting paid, those who weren't called initially, the Akali Nihang Singhs decided to do something very unique. And what was unique is described in the Multan Jangnama by a spy. A Muslim spy records a very unique scene. He reports seeing Akali Nihang Singhs fighting amongst one another. And why were they fighting, Khalsa Ji? They were fighting because they wanted to be the first one to lift the axle up, to place it on their shoulders, to load the gun, to let it fire. Now, for those of you who've done physics, you know that there's equal and opposite forces. If a cannon is going to be fired, which is 80 pounds in weight, there's going to be some recoil. It meant sure death to do that, Khalsa Ji. And yet, over 29 Akali Nihang Singhs placed that cannon on their shoulders and became Shaheed. And why did they become Shaheed, Khalsa Ji? Because they wanted to remove the last Afghan influence from Punjab. They wanted us to be free forever. Once the fort had been, a hole had been made in the fort, George Smith, one of the British majors, comments that Akali Nihang Singhs were the first people to jump into the fort. He reports there was an Akali Nihang Singh by the name of Jassa Singh, whose nickname was Malla Singh because he was constantly meditating on the name of God. This is what gives them the Shakti to place cannons on their shoulders, Khalsa Ji. Who else could do such an act? Those who were getting paid weren't prepared to do it. But Khalsa Ji, those who live in the will of Akaal, those who meditate day and night on the name of God are the only ones capable of doing this. In this way, the Akali Nihang Singhs were the first people to get into the Multan fort. And when they did this, Khalsa Ji, Akali Baba Phoola Singh themselves found Muzaffar Khan and decapitated him. Over 13,000 soldiers of Multan were killed that day. And Khalsa Ji, on the 2nd of June in 1818, the last existence of Afghan influence was in Punjab, never to come in that direction again. There's one more battle I want to talk to you about, and I know it's already half past, so I hope you can forgive me, but this is probably the most important battle. This is the battle that Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji became Shaheed, but it's very important that we study this battle, what Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji did, because something that should resonate for each and every one of us. Once Multan was captured, the Fauj managed to go all the way to Peshawar, and they took over the Peshawar Valley. Peshawar is very close to Jamrod Dakila, which is where the Khyber Pass is situated, which is where the seal was placed by Sardar Hari Singh Nalwa in 1837. After capturing Peshawar in 1818, the Pathans decided to attack once again. They decided to try and come back into India to ravish the men, the women, the children of India, as they'd done for tens of hundreds of years. In this way, a 40,000 strong army was assembled under the pretext of jihad. Constantly, they would declare jihad against the Sikh nation. In this way, Khalsa Ji, they began to massacre every single non-Muslim within the northern hills where the northwestern frontier is. They began to destroy Gurdwara Sahibs. They began to destroy temples. They began to try and provoke a response from Khalsa Raj. And this response was met by Maharaja Ranjit Singh personally, who dispatched an army of 25,000. But this time, Khalsa Ji, he'd asked the Jathedar of Akaal Thakht Sahib, Akali Nihang Baba Phoola Singh Ji, to accompany him. And as they made their way to the site of the battle, a war council was held. Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji was there, Sardar Hari Singh Ji was there, Sardar Karak Singh, one of the sons of Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji, was there too. And it was decided that now is the time to attack. If we delay any longer, then the Afghan army might become too strong. They might get reinforcements from Kabul. They might get heavy artillery. Now is the time to attack. In this way, on the 23rd of March, in 1823 at Amrit Vela, Akali Baba Nihang, Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji led the Sangat, which included Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji, Sardar Hari Singh Nalwa, and the rest of the forge in an Ardas, begging Maharaj to bless them and to give them hukam to advance. The hukam was received, and Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji and the Shahida missile began to lead from the front. And as they were going past Khalsa Ji, Sardar Desa Singh Ji, one of the generals in the army, got a message from a Khalsa spy. And that message was the army that's coming. The Afghan army is not 40,000 strong. They've received 10,000 more soldiers from Kabul. And Kabul, they've come with over 40 artillery guns as well. At this stage, Khalsa Ji, the Khalsa army was only 25,000, and their artillery was delayed. It hadn't arrived yet. Maharaja Ranjit Singh immediately stopped the Khalsa army and told them to go back. Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji, who had only 500 Akali Nihang Singhs with him at the time, was advancing forward and forward and forward. And then he realized the forge wasn't following. So he immediately went back to Maharaja Ranjit Singh and he said, "What are you doing?" And Maharaja Ranjit Singh told him a spy had come and had told him of the change in the circumstances. And Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji said, "This is not the traditions of the Khalsa. We've done an ardas before Satguru Shri Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj. Irrespective, if the army has increased tenfold, we have the blessings of Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj, who has given a bachan that anytime you fight for Dharam, anytime you fight against the dusht and dokhin of this world, Maharaj will lead right from the very front." Maharaja Ranjit Singh decided to play politics and say, "No, we shouldn't attack now, we'll attack tomorrow." Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji again reminded him, it's not Khalsa tradition to break this ardas. Maharaja Ranjit Singh again and again tried to persuade him. But Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji said, "You are a Maharaja, you are a king, you can decide what you want to do. But I and the Akali Nihang Singh Fauja are going to move forward, are going to attack, are going to fulfill our ardas. And when we do this, we are assured of victory. Because we have placed our faith, our love, our everything in Satguru Shri Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj." In this way, before setting out again, Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji stood before Satguru Shri Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj. And he begged Maharaj and he said, "Maharaj, please place your hand on our heads. We go into battle not to honor ourselves, not for our own glory, but for your glory, for the glory and the grandeur of the Khalsa Raj, for your Raj." Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji asked Maharaj to bless him so he could fight gallantly with only 500 Gursikhs against an army of 50,000 now Khalsa Ji. The commanders of the Khalsa army who had witnessed this began to cry. The soldiers in the Khalsa army began to cry. What were they witnessing, Khalsa Ji? They were witnessing Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji and the rest of the Shahida missile move forward. Not to restore their own faith in Maharaj, but to restore the faith of the whole Khalsa army in Satguru Shri Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj. They begged Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji to stop, to stay. But he moved forward. In this way, Khalsa Ji, the Pathan generals began to smile because they began to see the forge of Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji moving forward. They began to laugh because they're like, how can 500 people fight against an army of 50,000? And in this way, Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji dismounted from his horse and with his Nihang Singhs decided to charge forward. And in this way, the Pathans decided to fire at will. Again and again and again. And as they did this, the Nihang Singhs began to drop down. And yet Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji continued to move forward. History records that he was shot in his knee. A bullet had lodged in his knee. And yet Khalsa Ji, he still continued to move forward. He still began to believe in the faith. He still began to believe in the ardas that was done before Satguru Shri Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj. And in this way, Khalsa Ji, they came closer and closer and closer to the Pathan army. Although their numbers had decreased, they were in touching distance now. And once they were in touching distance, once they were in striking distance, no one can live with the Akali Nihang Singhs, who began to swing their swords. In this way, they began to cut down the Pathans. The Khalsa army, seeing this, began to request Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji to go into battle. And yet, he still held off. He said, no, we can't go yet. We're sacrificing too much. The Akali Nihang Singhs were becoming shaheed again and again and again. Imagine that scene. Imagine placing yourselves in the Khalsa army and witnessing that scene. What would you feel? What would you think? At this stage, history reports that Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji had been shot 4 times. And yet, he continued to roar Jakari. He continued to move forward. And he was followed by the Nihang Singhs. Khalsa Ji, eventually, when only a handful were left, the Khalsa's artillery arrived. And so did their reinforcements. And then Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji gave the order to attack. But Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji was still fighting from the front. He was on an elephant now, leading the charge. Only Akal Purkh knows how many times he was cut, how many times he was pierced by bullets that day. But Khalsa Ji, this is the Jathedar of Akaal Thakht, who had complete faith in Maharaj, who restored the faith of the Khalsa army in Satguru Shri Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj, because Maharaj had allowed the artillery to arrive, he had allowed reinforcements to arrive, and he'd allowed his son Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji to witness that. In this way, as Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji was charging forward, blood dripping from his face, from his back, from his chest, the skies began to darken, and it was almost like you could hear his mother's ardas, who had said 62 years earlier on, that please bless my son so that he becomes a shaheed in the battlefield, and let him die in such a way that he gives all his blood, everything to the Khalsa Panth. And when that happens, let Satguru Shri Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj come upon this earth and pick him up. In this way, Khalsa Ji, a final shot was sounded. A final bullet engraved into the chest of Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji. He fell to the floor. He kissed the battlefield that was about to make him shaheed. And there is no doubt, Khalsa Ji, that Satguru Shri Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj did his kirpa and took his son back home. The Khalsa army routed the Pathans. They destroyed them. This was the ardasa that was made by the Akal Takht Jathedar, who led from the front. He didn't send anyone else. He didn't make any statements on TV. He didn't make any statements in newspapers. No, Khalsa Ji. He led from the very, very front. And right till partition in 1947, the place where Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji fell, the place where he was cremated, was visited by Hindus and Muslims because they recognized this Singh as a Sant. The picture on the left-hand side is a picture of Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji Tega, just for you to get an idea of what the Mahakal Sarup of Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji charging into battle must have looked like. Now, there is no point in listening, in reflecting, in thinking, in hearing, or even in speaking about the Jeevani of Shaheed Singhs if we're not going to try and follow in their footsteps, if we're not going to try and walk in their footsteps, if we're not even going to try and be 1% of the type of Gursikhs that they were. Because Khalsa Ji, if we do that, then our lives, our blood, our breath, our souls will truly be able to call ourselves human beings, will truly be able to call ourselves the sons of Satguru Shri Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj. But there's only one way that this is going to happen. It's through restoring our faith in Satguru Shri Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj, making those steps before Maharaj, Remember, Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji didn't come this way, he was made in this way. Through the Naam Abhyas, through the Mool Mantra Abhyas, through Gur Mantra Abhyas. These are the steps that we need to take before Maharaj. And if we do that, with a true Ardas, with a true faith, then surely Satguru Shri Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj shall do their kirpa and shall bless us in such a way to live and breathe like the legend that is Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji. I'd like to ask you for forgiveness for talking so much and going on so much. But it's important that we remember what sort of Jeevani Akali Baba Phoola Singh Ji had. Because this is the true Jeevani that a Jathedar of Shri Akaal Takht Sahib is meant to have. So please consider me your younger brother, and I ask you to forgive me for any mistakes that I made. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Sat Sri Akal.